Good evening. This is Dale Lamb of Gardner Webb. It's Thursday, November the 3rd. This is our 9th weekly session from Mels 603. I'm going to start out tonight with a clarification on OMA component E or task E or part E, whichever you want to call it. Now, there's been some discussion and consternation that this is not required for continuing male students in 603 or 4 or 5. While it's true that it's not required for those students, I'm asking that students complete component E of the OMA for a couple of reasons. Number one, there needs to be something in task stream. Otherwise, we're going to have problems with your portfolio at the end with grading. That's a minor problem that we could work around. The bigger issue is that you need that information to put together PSYOP F. When you do that last component of this entire process, you will need that information. So here are the directions for completing it. I've got some examples. They're under Zoom session 9. This will not take a very long time. If you don't choose to do OMA component E, it will not count against your grade in the class or in your internship. It's just one of those, it would be wise to do it now rather than having to try to put all this information together when you do F. If you do this now, when you do component F, what you can do, let me go to new share and go to desktop, share screen, new share, show all windows. As you can see, when you have to do the very last component in your program, which is PSYOP component F, the candidate will produce a graphic organizer that illustrates the data collected and analyzed. That's for the entire program. And so what you do is you take all of the graphic organizers from the action plans of the app cell and the app tail, the marketing plan from the skip, the process plan from the OMA, and the action plan from the CAP. You put all those together and you're done. Now the rub comes in is if you haven't done OMAE, you don't have to do it, but you got to go back and get all that information that you gathered during the OMA in parts A through D. You have to go back and gather that information and put it in there. It's easier just to do E, and so that when you get to component F of the PSYOP, it's already there for you. You just have to stack those graphic organizers together. And it's fairly simple to do F. Saves you a lot of time and energy at the end. So my recommendation is you go ahead and do OMAE, submit it. You don't have to have it peer reviewed. It's a pass-fail. Just go ahead and submit it in task stream, as some of my other students have done, just like this one. This is Christy. She's went ahead and submitted it. You don't have to have it peer reviewed or any of that. You just submit E and it's done. Again, if you don't do it, it doesn't count against your grade and it doesn't count against your internship. It's just going to be much easier on you in the long run if you go ahead and do it now. But that's up to you. It's just one of those for your information. It's wise to do the work up front than having to try to catch it on the back end. As I said, I have some examples here on, again, for my 603 students. I will email these to the 604 students, but for 603 students, I have these under Zoom session 9, and I have some examples from Stephanie and Thurman and Drew, and let's look at the one. Let's go back and see if we can find. We'll just open this one. We'll open this one right here. This is Christie's. We'll see if this one will open. If not, I'll open one of the others. Here it comes. And there it is. And so you can see she wrote a couple of paragraphs on the importance and the alignment and those. But the main thing is to have this graphic organizer, because you're going to need that when you put together a SIOP-F. And you can look at these. And so this is a couple hours work right now, having to go back and revisit this and pull all your information out of your OMA to put it in your SIOP-F. It's going to be a lot longer than that. So you can see this one's not a very long one. It's about 3 pages long. Again, I have some different ones here. That one. Here's another one. I have some examples. Again, this one's 2, 3. This one's 4 pages. And that graphic organizer is what's important. If you, when you know, how you can create that, and it's easier just to create it in the context of these. So again, won't count against your grade if you don't do OMAE this semester. I would encourage you at some point to do OMAE, so it will be easier for you to do SIOP-F when you get there, because it's a compilation of all these plans: action, marketing, and process plans. Okay, we got a lot of material to cover tonight, so let me click out of these. Let me log out of task stream. And close that one out, and close that one out. All right, so here's, as I said, I have put the directions for OMAE here on Zoom session 9 and the examples for you to look at. That will help you. If you don't do it this semester, fine, but you'll need to revisit this at some point. All right, so let's look at our weekly schedule. So for week 9, we're starting human resources. I had you do a couple of discussion boards this week where you interview an administrator about human resources practices, and also employee assistance compensation and those kinds of things. Those were our activities this week, and you can see the reading. The OMA, in terms of evidence artifact work, OMA is due for review if you choose to do E, if you want to stay on schedule with that. If not, disregard that. Your 2 peer reviews of OMA-C are due in Blackboard discussion board, and C is due in task stream for evaluation. So that's where you are with your evidence artifact work and your weekly activities. All right. Get out of that. All right. Hiring decisions. Let's start with that one. It's all about people and relationships. Hire the right people, get the right people on the bus, and you can find the right seat for them. I have an MTSS for teachers plan where you get good people who are willing, and then how to make them able. We'll cover that in just a minute. But this PowerPoint is under week 9 Zoom session. Make sure you look at it. And it pretty much goes through what you learned when you did your interviews about human resources practices and hiring with your administrator, that the superintendent recommends and the board hires. Hopefully you learned how that process works, the advertisement. And this is just a legal background. Since this is 603, I always make sure that we have the legal stuff that goes along with it, as you can see here. This is the law, how that works. Make good informed decisions. No hire is better than a bad hire. Get the right people. A lot of districts do the reference work for you. If not, make sure you do your reference work and check their resumes. Some questions to ask yourself. How will this person impact your school culture, your community? Would you want your child in this class? Couple more questions there. Um, Establish procedures and protocols and stick with them. Whatever the process is in your county, make sure you follow it to the letter of the law. Most of you will be involved in an interview. I have a set of interview questions that I'll show you in a minute, things that are allowable. Again, make sure that you go through the proper process, that you've got the position that's advertised before you start interviewing. And this is just a reminder to go through those steps. The vacancy announcements, this is stuff you should have learned through your interviews. And so I won't spend, this is a long one, but pretty much this is a, talks about the duties and powers of the principals, goes back to that one. All the other things, grounds for dismissal, all of that stuff that you should have learned through your interviews. If you haven't done your interviews, you really need to make sure you see this one. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with it tonight, but make sure you go back and review this PowerPoint. It kind of puts it, again, this is one of those items for your toolbox. It puts the entire process together for you in one place. And that's why I like this one. So again, this is Hiring Decisions PowerPoint, which can be found under Zoom session week 9. Luke, is that you? Can you hear me, Luke? I think Luke has just joined us. All right. How are you, Luke?
I'm okay. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Glad to have you tonight. All right. So make sure you view this Hiring Decisions PowerPoint, and it encapsulates the entire process, from the legal aspect and all the things that you're responsible for. Now, during that process, you're going to do interviews. And so let me see. Let me click on this. Here are a long list of interview questions that principals typically ask during the interview. A lot of times your district has a script for you to use during interviews. If not, here are the kinds of things that you would ask. There's a lot of them, and so I won't go through them all. Tell us about your work professional experience, why you want to be an administrator, what are your professional goals. These are the kind of questions that you can ask. As you know, you can see that. Make sure that you don't delve into questions that are out of bounds about religion or race or personal things, number of children, that kind of stuff. This is all work-related things. Mm-hmm. So here are the allowable questions. This is pretty much every question that you'd be allowed to ask as a school administrator, principal interviewing a teacher. So make sure that you view these. Some of these are for principal and assistant principal interviews also. But a lot of these are questions that the principal would ask when interviewing for teachers. You'll just have to kind of sort through them and see which are which. All right. So here are school administrator interview questions. These are allowable questions. So let me go back to Zoom session 9. So these are the kinds of things that you could ask. Again, tools for your toolbox. FIE, human resources. This is a general PowerPoint that speaks to human resources and school finance, and gives you some information. Another one of these tools for you. It discusses merit pay, certification issues, early retirement, some of the ins and outs that you need to know. Again, not a very long PowerPoint, but review this one because it speaks to funding and funding issues for human resources. It's a good one. It's fairly quick. It's not a lot to have to go over on that one. All right, cancel that. Back to Zoom session 9. All right. I have the teacher evaluation manual here for you, and God, we certainly don't have time to go through all that tonight. That's another one of those things that you need to review
Mhm.
about how evaluations are done, the basis for evaluation. You know that it's McRail is the basis of evaluation in North Carolina. Now, right now, a teacher's evaluation is partly based on observations and partly based on EVOS, the number, if their students, 85% of their students make growth. It's not, the idea is eventually that it will be 50-50. It's about 80-20 right now, 80% on teacher observation and 20% on growth of students. The goal is to get to 50-50. I have a document here, EVOS Standard 6, that explains all of that, the legal underpinnings of that, so you might want to read through that. But again, I think most districts are still about 80-20. So 80% of a teacher's evaluation, total evaluation, is made up from uh, going in the classroom and doing formal observations and doing walkthroughs, and about 20% is based on whether their students, 85% of their students make growth. But that explanation of all that is under EVOS Standard 6. Now, I've got the principal's evaluation manual in here too for principals and assistant principals.
Now, when you say make growth, though,
Mm-hmm.
some people have like 15%, and then next year they make 16%. That's still growth.
What you're looking at when we talk about students making growth, every student has a predicted score that if they raw score on the EOG or EOC that would represent a year's growth. What teachers are evaluated on is what percentage of their students make growth, of their individual students make their growth, and the goal is 85 or higher, 85% or higher of your students making 1 year of growth. That's how teachers, that will eventually become half of a teacher's evaluation. The other half will be their observations. Right now it's about 80-20. But every kid has a score, and it's not a score that's for everybody. Every kid has an individual score that he must make on the standardized end of year test, whether it's EOG or EOC, that would show a year's growth for that year. Every kid has his own individual score. It's not a common score. It's not every kid makes the same number. Every kid's number is individual to that kid. Let me go over that for you. I'm glad you asked that question. Let me show you how that growth model works. So here we go. All right. From my research, now again, hold 1 second. My throat's dry tonight. I gotta find me something to drink here. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. For my research, this is the EVOS model. Now, remember, SAS that does the model for the state, SAS Institute in Raleigh, they don't publish this because they're a private company and it's proprietary. But for my research, I believe there are 10 dependent variables that they calculate the independent variable. The independent variable is the number that a kid would have to make test score wise to show a year's growth. And so here are the things. Again, what they've done is they didn't just pull these numbers out of the air. They have done analysis of variance on years and years, about 20 years of test scores, and what they have found is here. I believe these are the 10 factors that they use to determine what that growth should be for an individual kid. Race is 30%, mother's education 15%, father's income 15%, teacher 10%. Teachers can account for up to 10% of the variance in a kid's test scores. School district, school, grade, age, gender, and previous test scores. All of those are factored in to an algorithm or a linear regression, and that's how you come up with it. Now, this is on our board for tonight. You can go back through and read this. So let's work through an example. Third grade math EOG has 180 questions. So the total raw score that any kid could achieve would be 180 if he had a perfect score. The question is, what score out of 180 would represent a year's growth? Obviously not 180, but what part of that 180 would represent a year's growth? A regression equation is used to determine the score would be total percentage of dependent variables times the total raw score used as a target score to show a year's growth. So here we go. Jamar's a third grade student in CMS. His dependent variables are, he's black, so that's 20 out of 30. White would be 30 out of 30. Hispanic would be 15 out of 30. Now, that's not racist, and that's not Dale's opinion. That's about the ratio that kids score in the state of North Carolina. There is a score gap. We know that. Mother less than a high school diploma would be 5 out of 15. If she had beyond a 4-year degree, would be 15. No father in home, that would be 0. If the father's income was in excess of 150,000, that would be 15. Teacher, we always factor in a good teacher. A great teacher would be 10. CMS is a high wealth district, gets 5 points. A low wealth district would be 2 points. Elementary school, Billingsville was a takeover school that year. High growth school would have been a 5. Grade 5, he's 5 points. He's not a repeater, so that's 5 points. Age, you could get up to 5 points for that. He got 3 because he was 9-year-old, developmentally delayed, started school at age 6. Gender 5, female would be 4. The difference in math and male and female math scores would be just reversed if it were a reading test. Previous scores 2 was not on grade level according to M-class data coming out of 2nd grade. So Jamar's equation looks like this. 20 plus 5, these are the scores that his dependent variables earned him, which would be 55%. So we multiply that 55% times the total possible score would be 180. So Jamar, to show a year's growth, would have to score 99 out of 180. So what this regression equation does is it takes into account all the variables of that child. So every child is going to be different, but he's only competing against himself. Let me say that again. He's only in the growth comparative model. He only is compared to himself, not somebody else. So for Jamar to show a year's growth, he'd have to score 99, whereas, Jamal or Jimmy or somebody else might have to score 103 or 105 or 110 to show a year's growth. But that's all based on their particular circumstance. This is by far the most equitable way to determine what a year's growth would be for a child and to hold teachers accountable for that. I mean, this particular child is never going to score 150. It's unrealistic to hold him or teacher to that standard because of what he brings to school with him every day. And so this is the most equitable model. And so every kid's growth score is separate and independent and is unique to that child. Now the question is, do 85% of the kids in your classroom as a teacher make their particular growth score? Not a growth score, but their particular growth score. So that's how EVOS is going to be calculated in. So if Luke teaches a classroom of 30 kids and 28 of them make their growth score, that's 95%, 93%. That's great. That's what we're looking for. Now, they may all score 1s and 2s, but they made growth for them. And that's by far a much more equitable than comparative accountability, which set an artificial standard that every kid had to meet, regardless of what the baggage that they brought with them from home each day. So eventually, we're going to get to a model where half of your evaluation as a teacher is based on whether 85% of your kids made growth or not, and the other half will be from your formal observations. So that's what EVOS looks like.
So what about the school report card?
On the school report card, it's going to show growth, but it's also going to show comparative for a while yet. Eventually, the idea is that eventually it will only show growth. You know, traditions die hard. You know that some people have to have somebody to beat so they can brag at the country club or down at whatever social functions that they hang out at. But we're trying to get away from that, because that holds teachers accountable to a standard that they can't achieve. It also is an unrealistic expectation. We want all kids to eventually score at the 85th percentile, but that's just not realistic right now, given the background of some kids. And so the idea is did you work with that child and do a good job and move them a year from wherever they were before? And that takes into consideration where you started with them from. Comparative accountability only says every kid's got to score 75% and be on grade level. Well, that's not realistic. If the kid came to you at scoring 50, you're not going to make 25 points gain in 1 year. So that is the notion. That's where we're headed. Read that EVOS Standard 6 that I have on 9. It explains all this to you. But this is a real child right here, by the way. Last name's not used. His name was changed to protect the innocent. But that's how EVOS works. Every kid has his own score that he needs to make based on his own set of dependent variables. And I believe that these 10 things right here are those dependent variables right here. Race, mother's education, father's income, teacher, school district, school grade, age, gender. So which of those can be manipulated? Only the teacher and the grade versus age. Why do you think we've stopped trying to retain kids? We know that they don't score as high. So we have control over whether we retain kids or not. So that's why all schools are now doing RTI, response to intervention, to try to get kids back where they need to be, so that we don't have to retain kids. But the only other variable in there that can be manipulated is who the teacher is. So that's where you need to be spending your time as administrator, trying to improve teachers, hiring the right people, getting the right people on the bus, and then finding the right seat for those people, having them working with them to be in the right place once you get them. And that speaks to this MTSS model that I have for teachers. I'm asked quite often, all right, you get the right people. How do I then go about making sure that they're the best that they can be? Well, here's the model that I propose. This is pretty much what you should have come up with in your APTEL in teacher empowerment. But what you do is you do staff development whole group on Marzano's 9 at the beginning of the year, and then again at mid-year. How long that you do that staff development during those work days is dependent upon where your teachers are. If you've got a bunch of new teachers, it better be a pretty lengthy staff development to introduce high yield strategies in Marzano. If you've got teachers who are employing high yield strategies, it may last as little as 30 minutes. That's dependent upon your data from the year before in terms of your walkthrough data and your teacher evaluation data, how long that staff development, that whole group should be. Then you should be doing PLC work on the identify the 1 or 2 lowest of those 9 strategies in terms of usage by teachers, and you should be doing that work in PLCs to try to get those teachers using those strategies more. How often they work on those strategies in PLC is, again, if none of your teachers are using non-linguistic representation, you better be working on it about once a week. But if it's 50% adoption, then you might do it once a month. But again, it goes back to your data that's why we had you do walkthroughs in the APTEL, to learn that that's how you get information to form instructional decisions and staff development decisions. And then you should start one-on-one peer coaching with your beginning teachers immediately, first quarter. And here's something for you. When you're talking about the OMA and building a schedule, there's a hierarchy of how you build your schedule: federal law, then state law, then local board policies, and then best practices. And I'm asked quite often, what's an example of a best practice in scheduling? Well, I think probably the most critical best practice in scheduling is to make sure that mentors and mentees do not have common planning. Let me say that again. I know that sounds crazy. Make sure that your mentors and mentees do not have common planning. Why would that be? They need to be able to go into one another's classroom while the other is teaching. If they have common planning time, they're both in planning at the same time. That means that when the new teacher could go in and watch the veteran teacher, the veteran teacher is also on planning. So you've got to build into your schedule where your mentors and mentees don't have common planning time so they can go watch one another in class. Second quarter, you continue on with the same model, except you now add in your low performing teachers who are not doing well with the 9 high yield strategies, and whose students quarterlies don't come out very good. You're not seeing a lot of growth in kids in the quarterly exams. You better put those teachers, you better get them a mentor and get started working with them immediately. Second quarter, don't wait until near test time in the spring. Go ahead and start second quarter, sometime toward the end of October around parent conferences when the quarter change is over. That's when you need to add more teachers being mentored by your better teachers who use high yield strategies. Now you say, well, how do we determine that? Again, through walkthrough data. The people that we know are using best practices, we have them to work with teachers who aren't using best practices. Again, it goes back to that APTEL model, staff development model of empowerment. The teachers who get taught are on their way to becoming empowered classroom leaders, to be better leaders in their own classroom. And the teachers that do the teaching are on the first step to becoming a school-wide leader, because the first step in that journey is to teach other teachers. That goes back to Whitaker's model that you learned about in 602. So, and then third quarter, teachers now had one quarter where you did staff development with them, whole group, and you did PLCs, and they still didn't start using best practices. And then they had another quarter where they had one-on-one coaching. If they still aren't using best practices, it's time to go to an action plan. And so now they go through the third quarter on an action plan for improvement, still getting that one-on-one coaching. And by the end of the third quarter, time the fourth quarter starts, sometime around April 1st, you can give them a notice of non-renewal. That we gave you an opportunity 9 weeks to try to catch on. You didn't do that on your own. We provided you staff development and PLC work. We gave you a quarter without any pressure on you with one-on-one coaching. We gave you another quarter of one-on-one coaching when you knew that you had to improve. You were on an action plan. So you've had a half a year of coaching and you still haven't improved. It's time to get somebody else on the bus. So this model, again, is under 602 lesson plan, EVOS lesson plan, that's on week 9. But this speaks to personnel. It speaks to, this week is about making the right hiring decisions, asking the right questions, knowing how to evaluate teachers in terms of using walkthroughs and formal evaluations. And the basis of that, and why I have that teacher evaluation manual on there this week, the basis of that is Marzano's high yield strategies. And if teachers aren't using those, they aren't going to get those 10 points of value in terms of in the growth model. Only teachers using those high yield strategies are going to get those 10 points. And those 10 percentage points make the difference between a kid making a year's growth and a kid not making a year's growth. And so these things are not separate and disparate ideas. They all work together. High yield strategies, putting together a staff development plan, empowering teachers, all this stuff works together. The law is there to support you in terms of personnel law. You've done everything you could. You did staff development, you did PLC work, you did one-on-one coaching, you did one-on-one coaching and an action plan. And teachers that still don't get it don't need to be on the bus with you. You can't make it. I'm telling you, as a principal, you can't make it if you don't have teachers who are who are on board and understand that they have to be using those high yield strategies if you're going to make growth in the EVOS model. And that 10% of the variance in a kid's test score is directly due to the teacher. So it's imperative that you hit the ground running. And so again, I have proposed by date here shows you what you need to be doing by law. That this is the stuff that if you're going to try to dismiss non-performing teachers, you're going to have a model like this that you're working. It can't just be random. It can't just be arbitrary. You need a model like this. And here's the model. This is one that I developed. You might have something different, but this one follows the law and takes into account EVOS and strategies and empowerment. All those things is rolled into this one model. And if you have teachers who don't understand how EVOS works and how growth works, this is an explanation of how that works and how each kid has an individual score.
Now, where do you get the individual scores? Do you get it from like the reading, the English department, language arts?
No. Each kid's EVOS score, growth score it comes to you from in your EVOS package.
Okay.
That's one of those things that's in your list of activities that you need to do as an intern is have the principal show you that EVOS package that comes from SAS and Raleigh. They've calculated what every kid's score has to be. That comes to you directly through the State Department from SAS. That's not a local thing. That's been calculated for every kid by that group of people. And again, they have all this data available. If you look at this list of things, I mean, this is stuff that is reflected, that's reflected in a kid's pack. I mean, this is stuff that's known to the state. We have all this information readily available. Previous test scores, we have all this information available. DPI gives it to SAS. They run a regression equation, and then they send out to schools a package that has every kid and what their growth score would be, whether it be the math test, EOG, or the reading EOG. They have that calculated for each one of those and their overall composite score, what that should be based on those individual tests. So it's not like somebody at the central office is calculating it, and you can be sure that when you get it, this is a fair and honest appraisal of that kid. It's by far the most equitable way for this to be done. It takes local politics out of it also. And the good thing about this model is if you're in a school or school district that tends to give certain teachers, higher performing kids, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's easier to get growth out of the lower kids than it is the higher kids because they don't have to score as high, and it's all based on that kid themselves. So this takes the favoritism out of, well, yeah, of course she made her test scores because the principal gave her the best kids. That's not the case now. It's all based on the individual kids, and so I've heard that there are some districts out there that still happens, that they group kids by ability, and certain teachers get the bluebirds every year. Some get the buzzards and some get the robins. You get the different groups. When I came along in school, they were known as bluebirds, robins, and buzzards, the high, medium, and low classes. I think there might be some people that still do that. But even if that's the case, that's not an equitable way. That's not a good way to do things, but it won't hurt your ability to make growth with your kids. I don't particularly like homogeneous grouping, but the story I tell is I was a principal in the state at an elementary school up in the western part of the state when we started performance-based accountability. 84, the basic ed plan was passed. In 89, the standard course of study was fully implemented because basic ed plan said every kid gets a basic education, appropriate education. And somebody said, well, what is that? So we had to design a statewide curriculum. It was called the Standard Course of Study. It was fully implemented by '89. That same year, we started performance-based accountability. And first thing that we were told to do as principals is no longer to group kids by ability, that they should be heterogeneously mixed. And my favorite story is I had a parent call me and she was all upset and crying and said, well, why are you upset and crying? She said, well, my kid's in the dumb class. I said, no, your kid's not the dumb. Well, Jimmy's in there and everybody knows Jimmy's an idiot. And I said, that's not hardly how it works. We're doing heterogeneous grouping, and that was about 1989 or 90, and nobody had ever done that in this state at that time. But we know that kids do better in a heterogeneously mixed class. But even if you're in a school that doesn't do that anymore, in the growth model, that won't hurt you as a teacher because your kids have their own individual score to make. So that covers that. All right. Again, I've got the teacher evaluation. Resume share. Let me go back. Share screen. All right. So again, tonight, the things that I've covered. OMAE is optional for you. Won't hurt your grade if you don't do it. Won't hurt your internship score if you don't do it, but it would be smart to do it because you're going to need that information when you put together SIOP F. It's up to you. If you decide to do it, you just put it in and for evaluation in task stream, it's pass fail. You don't have to do peer review or any of those things on OMAE. I've got hiring decisions, which is a really good PowerPoint that walks you all the way through from advertisement to hire. I've got sample interview questions. Some of them are mixed in for assistant principals, but a lot of them are for teachers. They're the kinds of questions that you can ask legally. Human resources speaks to the financial role of human resources. It's fairly short. Teacher evaluation manual shows you that teacher evaluation is based on whether you use Marzano or not. And that's also linked to high strategies. Marzano is linked to EVOS, making your growth. So regardless of what percentage of a teacher's evaluation is based on teacher observation and what percentage is based on EVOS, their kids making growth, both of those are dependent upon you using Marzano's high yield strategies. That's the point that I'm trying to make tonight, that either way you're evaluated, regardless of what percentage of those two things factor into a teacher's evaluation, they both are dependent upon using Marzano's high yield strategies. EVOS Standard 6 kind of tells you about EVOS and where we're headed to eventually 50-50 on teacher evaluation. That lesson plan that I just showed you gives you an example of how a kid's score is calculated and the dependent variables that are used to calculate that score. The principal evaluation manual speaks to that you have to put in place staff development to improve teachers. Once you hire the right people, the evaluation manual speaks to what you have to do with those teachers to make them better. And again, on the EVOS lesson plan, I have my model that's based on that manual, that principal's manual of what legally you're supposed to do to try to improve instruction. Where you use whole group, PLC, and one-on-one coaching. I have an example of that under the EVOS lesson plan.
Do you have to use the school, what the school assigns for you?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Like the high yield strategies.
You have to use Marzano's 9, yes.
Okay.
Those are consistent. That again is what EVOS is based on. It's also what our teacher evaluation model in North Carolina is based on. McReal, which is Robert Marzano, and his 9 high yield strategies. That's what our teacher evaluation system is based on, that, and what in EVOS is based on that. And that's why they're called the 9 high yield strategies, because they yield higher test scores. And so that's why North Carolina, we adopted that system years ago. If we change to something else, we'll do that. But right now, both EVOS and the observation system is based on high yield strategies, Marzano. And so they're not, those two things aren't separate and distinct. They're part and parcel of one another. I mean, Doing high yield strategies will get you better test scores. It will also get you better evaluations. That's why you do them. So that's what I have for you tonight. If you have questions, again, on OMAE, I've got some good examples here for you. Again, it won't affect your grade. I've been asked that a dozen times. No, if you don't do OMAE, it won't hurt your grade. It'll just hurt you in the long run when you have to sit down and put all the information together when you do PSYOP-F. It would be smart to do it up front. If you don't have time now, you might want to revisit it later. But you are going to, as I showed you, you are going to be called on for that information later on. In the past, before we had E, you just had to go back and put it all together. Now we have a little format for you to put it together in E so that you'll have it when you go to do PSYOP Component F. All right. Questions about any of these materials that I've covered tonight?
No. Well, I'm just like the high yield strategies.
Yes.
What if we have a lot of difficult students?
Yes.
How do we go about implementing all that?
Well, one of the things that I've often said is if you're working with at-risk students, there's probably 4 or 5 of those that work better than the others.
Right.
That I would concentrate on. Homework is a difficult one because a lot of kids, at-risk kids, don't have people at home to help them with homework and maybe don't have a quiet place. You might want to rethink how you do homework. You especially don't want to send any new work home. A lot of times what you do for homework for at-risk kids are just repetitive skills on things that you've covered in class. Cooperative learning sometimes is difficult. You might want to find maybe use cooperative learning in a different way that's maybe teacher-led rather than student-directed. Questioning and cluing works even with at-risk kids. Questioning and cluing works if you do it the right way. So of the 9, similarities and differences tends to work really well with at-risk kids. They get that. But if we go back and look, if I can pull it up here, that's a good question. The good thing about high yield strategies is you can use them in various ways and modify them somewhat. Okay, so here are the 9 instructional strategies. Similarities and differences, summarizing and note-taking. Boy, that's one you really need to work hard with at-risk kids. Luke, you know what I'm talking about. That's basically the heart of the AVID program that Charlotte Mecklenburg uses, is teaching kids how to summarize and do note-taking. That's a really good one. Reinforcing effort.
I have a problem with that because I special ordered a book and it specifically says note taking, and some people have a problem with that, but I'm finding some of they retain it more because if they're on computers.
Yeah, of course they do. One of the things that people have problems with note taking is that higher level kids, it doesn't work as well with them. So even in CMS, some of the higher scoring middle schools never really got fully vested in AVID. AVID is based on kids who are not performing well in school. That's the whole point of AVID, is they're not reaching their potential. It's for lower performing kids. And the heart of the program is note taking. Now, I'm not telling you that should, you do it differently for the group. Note taking is done differently in upper level, in higher performing schools and lower. But in lower performing schools, teaching kids how to take notes is very important. That's why I said homework and practice. Homework is completely different in for our high performing schools and low performing. You can't, in low performing schools, you can't send stuff home that requires a lot of time or parental assistance or those kinds of things or new information. It's more practice. That's why it says homework and practice.
Right.
It's more practice in low performing with low performing kids. Non-linguistic representations. This works really well with low performing because this is visual representation rather than this is more visual than comprehension and reading kind of things. That works really well with low performing kids. Cooperative learning, you really have to. It's very different with low and high performing kids. Low performing kids, it has to be teacher directed. You can't just turn it over to in low performing kids. You just can't turn cooperative learning over to them. It just becomes a free for all. Setting objectives and providing feedback, that works with all kids, but you just have to adjust it. Generating and testing hypothesis. Again, you just call it prediction rather than hypothesis. And lower performing kids can catch on just fine if you call it prediction. They understand prediction. Who's going to win the ball game tomorrow night or later tonight? They understand that. I mean, and you can work that into lessons. Cueing and questioning, advanced organizers. Again, advanced organizers goes back to note taking, and that's the heart of the AVID program is advanced organizers and note taking. Cueing and questioning, everybody can do that, and you can do it differently with lower performing kids so that you don't put them on the spot. So there is a way that you can adapt all of these strategies to whatever level kids that you have. Again, I would use some of them more than others. I wouldn't use homework as much as I would practice.
Right.
I would, with lower kids, I would do a lot of note taking, and I would do advanced organizers. I don't think I would do as much cooperative learning. I would do some, but that would not be my go-to. Again, you kind of have to work through these and figure out ways to do these, and that's what you do in PLCs. Is I did this activity to reinforce effort and provide recognition, and it worked really well. Or, well, I did that one and it didn't go well at all. And that's what you do in PLCs is you have teachers bring examples of each of these and they share these, what works, what they're doing to address, identifying similarities and differences and what works and what doesn't. That's what you do in PLC. When I talk about PLC work, on Marzano, exactly what you do is the practical application of these things. What did you do in your room that worked? What didn't work? Working through with other teachers and finding common ground with other teachers on things that work and things that don't work. That's what you do in PLCs. So great question. How do but everybody can adapt these to their individual classroom and kids or the kids that they teach. But a lot of the success is based on how well you operate your PLCs and how often and how much you work on these things in PLC. Finding practical applications of these inside classroom lessons. That's, that model of instruction is very important.
Yeah, because they're trying to set everything to a technology, and I'm not really that comfortable with that.
Well, a lot of kids that don't have technology other than cell phones, it doesn't really work.
Right.
That you have to find other ways to do it. I agree that technology is one of the 21st century skills and that we should be working on that. But we have to scaffold kids. I'm not sure I like that term, but that's what it's called. Is you take kids where they are and you scaffold. It's kind of like going up steps, and technology is pretty high up on the. You have to get them to that point. Technology is pretty high up on that scaffold, pretty high up on that rung. You can't start with technology at a very high level. You have to start and work your way up to that. And again, that's called scaffolding. That's one of those things that you do. You take kids where they are and you move them to where they need to be. Sometimes that's very difficult with technology because sometimes you can't really scale it down to them unless they have the capability and have the access. It's really hard to do it in a classroom setting when you only have them for a short period of time.
Right.
It makes technology difficult. So yes, you can integrate technology in, but technology can't always be the main attraction. Sometimes it has to be the sideshow that goes along with the main attraction.
Exactly, because I'm having a hard time trying to use technology, have them focus on task with that.
Yes.
I'm spending my time just monitoring what they're doing on other websites, and then they're talking about that's classroom management. No, it's not.
No.
Monitoring.
No. No. At-risk kids need more direct instruction.
Right.
That's the nature of the beast. And no disrespect intended, but it's just, there are certain characteristics of learners that we know, and at-risk learners need more direction from teachers.
Right.
You can't, that's why I said, just like cooperative learning many times doesn't work, you can't just turn them loose on their own. They'll find a way to fill the time, but it won't always be what you need them to be doing.
Right.
You have to do more teacher-led things with your lower level learners. Technology is good, but you can't just turn kids loose with technology that aren't familiar with it. They end up places you don't want them to go, and it's hard to monitor them. It has to be more teacher-led type technology things where you take them and move them along a continuum to where they can work to get to where they're more independent. But you just can't give them their independence to start with because that won't go well. We all know that.
Right.
That does become a classroom management problem. So, the key to success in using high yield strategies is PLC work where teachers share strategies that they have used, individual lessons, individual activities to address these 9 high yield strategies, the practical application of them. This worked, this didn't work, this is what I did, this was the result. That's the important part of how we spread successful use of these high yield strategies. You don't just put these 9 strategies on the board and say, do these things. That's not the way it works. These are categories of things, but you have to develop individual activities that work for you as a teacher and for your group of kids that come out of these things. They don't look the same with every group of kids. And that's hard. But if you make that a priority in your PLC work, going back to that MTSS for Teachers model that I have, is that is a focal point of your PLCs, is sharing strategies, activities, individual activities that you do to address each of those 9 high yield strategies. What's the practical application of questioning and cluing? What did you do questioning and cluing wise that worked in your classroom? That's what you should be doing in PLCs. And if you have teachers who are struggling with high yield strategies, they should be working on it regularly in PLCs.
Right.
All right. I see my time is up.
Okay.
As always, call me, email me if you have questions or problems.
Okay.
Try to stay up with your evidence artifact work, and I will see y'all next week. Y'all have a good week. Thank you.
All right. You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.